Well, hello everyone. So this is the identity panel, and for a topic as broad as identity, it's easy to get sort of floating in generalities without keeping things focused. So I think to start off, I'd like to sort of give a few thoughts about how to keep this focused. I think one would be try to focus on use cases and try to focus on existing systems that are being built. And then another one is, let's try to talk through some of the existing protocols. Ethan here is working on Weave. There's a few different projects on Cosmos, building identity systems. And then Jana here is a lawyer and has a different perspective on identity. So I'd like to sort of make this conversation be a synthesis of all the perspectives, and let's try to get something useful out of it. But before we start on that, do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves really quickly?
Yeah, just a quick introduction from my side. I'm a lawyer in Switzerland, German and Swiss qualified, focusing on fintech regulation and on legal tech.
I'm Jae Kwon, and I'm a technical co-founder for Tendermint and Cosmos, and also a member of the ICF, Interchain Foundation.
Hello, I'm Ethan Frey, and I'm working at IOV, technical lead, building the blockchain name service.
Nice. So the first topic that I wanted to discuss relatively briefly is the subject of identity has been kind of a hot topic in blockchains recently, and one of the projects kind of driving that is an open standard called the Decentralized Identifier Spec, or DID spec. On top of this very basic identity platform, they do stuff like attestations and verifiable data, as well as sign-on and various different other authentication methods. And I'd just like to hear what your experience has been with that and how you're thinking about DIDs and building these identity platforms.
You want to start?
Okay, I'll start. I think we started building the blockchain name service before I knew about DIDs.
Yeah.
More recently, over a year ago. But the interesting point is we came particularly, so we posit names as center of identity. Whereas the public key can change. Maybe you have key recovery to change. That's not permanent. The name is permanent. And from those names, we said, okay, what is my Bitcoin address? What's my Ethereum address? What's my IOV address? What's my Cosmos address? And those are claims, in a way. But those aren't verifiable. We came across this, how do I verify them? The key, I think, in DIDs is the verifiable attestations. Because I can claim I am this address in Ethereum, and I'll claim Vitalik's address in Ethereum. And that's me. But how do I prove that? I have to actually have a counterclaim attestation from Ethereum proving that is me. So I think that whole concept of these attestations is very, very essential.
I think the concept of attestations is fairly interesting, not only for like individual identities, but also potentially for device identities. Have you worked with any use cases like that?
We have not. We were considering for blockchain identities.
Yeah. And
we have a spec for that, beginning implementation, and couldn't. And I think it's not actually going to be usable until IBC is out in Cosmos ecosystem. We were looking for client-side identity management for blockchains, which was kind of funny. But if you actually have blockchains to improve the identity, they can actually own their own identity in a way. And the blockchain to IBC can update its identity and update which tokens it controls.
Yeah.
And you get a registry of all these things. What's the name of the blockchain? What's the header, recent header of the blockchain? What tokens on that blockchain issued, native tokens from it, which ones it's connected to, and maybe what are some major bootstrap nodes from validators that you connect to. All that stuff needs a permissioning scheme, which we found is a daunting task. With IBC, you can give control over the record to the chain itself. And so we say that identity is a chain, actually is a self-sovereign entity with its own identity at that point.
That's a really cool concept. Jay, on DIDs, it's something we've been talking about a little bit internally recently. Do you have any thoughts there?
I think DIDs are cool. It's if you read the spec, it says a few things that maybe if I repeat them, it'll help the listener understand what it is, what it tries to do. It says that it's not about name resolution, and what it tries to do is provide general plugins. It's an extensible system to allow what are called DID methods to provide pathway towards getting verifiable claims, attestations about an identity. And like what Frey was saying, you can use the like client spec or IBC as a DID method. So you can have a DID method that allows you to read information from Ethereum, Bitcoin, or Cosmos chain, or Tendermint chain. And I think this is probably the right way to go. It's flexible enough that it makes sense to use it. Maybe there's some dangers with regards to how flexible it is, that there are like DID methods that are not secure. Then what's going to happen is if we grow this ecosystem for verifiable claims, and but they're all using, it's so extensible that people choose to allow the usage of insecure methods. And I imagine it'll eventually become a problem. Kind of like how like SSL being too extensible has been a problem, and so on. But otherwise, it sounds great. Yeah.
It's cool. One of the hot topics in blockchain right now is KYC, AML, and obviously identity plays a huge part in that. Jana, I know you've done some work in that area. How do you think about identity when it comes to KYC, AML?
Yeah, I think there are really two sides. So one side is what you just discussed, getting some certification of who has which claims. I mean, from a legal side, we see it more in a broader context. So we have this world on the blockchain, we have this digital world, and then we have, let's say, the outside world with still passports and everything. So the question is, how do we get all this information about a person somehow connected to the digital world, and in a way that on the one hand it's secure, and on the other hand it can be easily used. I think that's the challenge at the moment, and one way that how it might work might be using the blockchain, and I would be interested how you see this, because I mean at the moment, for example, for banks, if you want to open a bank account, you have to do KYC. Yes. You have to submit all the information, typically on paper, or you have to do some video online identification. It takes a long time, there are often problems, and it just doesn't make sense to do this with each bank again. So why don't we create some online digital identity where we have the private key and we grant access to people where we want to. And I think that's where we should aim at.
That is, I think, definitely the dream of a lot of these identity systems, and frequently the devil is in the details and the implementation there. Ethan, do you want to talk a little bit more about what you're building at IOV and how that might solve some of those problems?
I think it won't solve this KYC problem. It's what we're building, first of all, accessibility.
Yeah.
We started on accessibility, which is I can use a name to represent all my tokens. It's great if I send you some Bitcoin, you can send me Ethereum. And you know my name, right? So you can look up the name of the person that sent it to you and then reverse it on another chain. So I have all my addresses connected. I don't have to expose all my personal data there. I can have a pseudonym. I have 5 different accounts, and only one of them is linked together. So this is my public address, and the other money goes to other accounts which are not publicly accessible. So the privacy issue there of hiding data, or if I put a name on something, it becomes known, is an issue we had, which is interesting with this privacy thing. It's not really an issue because we're not actually making it less private. We're just exposing things are there, because before I have a hex address, it's private. It's not private. You can trace all the transactions in and out of it. It just looks private. So we make it obvious it's not private because you can trace the other name easily. What I think is interesting, especially with things like KYC claims and digital identities, which we've only discussed, we haven't actually concretely worked on them, but KYC chain would be awesome, and tying KYC into this is the privacy aspect. It would be amazing to be able to say, I'm going to, with my private key on this blockchain, I'm going to sign that I am this digital identity key. And they'll sign with my RSA key off my Estonian ID or my German ID or my English ID card, reverse sign that public key, and now they've signed each other, and they say, look, I've proven I am this person. However, I don't want to put that on the blockchain.
Yeah.
I might want to put on the blockchain some Merkle root that then can use to expose that I am a citizen of this country or that I am over 18 years old, but not my full identities. So that's one thing that we've only investigated at point, and I think the idea of the privacy aspect is a huge aspect here. We want to be able to partially disclose information.
I mean, this seems like a perfect use case for zero-knowledge proofs. Anyway,
Yeah, well,
I think,
yeah.
sorry, Jay. Yeah,
That's a good point. Yeah, you can Merkleize, just like if you were to consider like all the possible choices of how to preserve privacy. I don't think we understand, or I don't understand all the possibilities. But just to name a few, yeah, you can put all the information on the chain. That makes it completely transparent. You can hide some of it by Merkleizing the properties into a root that's on the blockchain, so you can only see the commitment. But if you want, you can also later, at any time, get the Merkle proof of a property. But then that also makes it, like, the problem with that though is like, maybe you don't want this property to be leaked to the public, right? Like, you don't want anyone to be able to prove that property after they receive it.
Yeah.
So then there's also other needs to maybe provide attestations privately to a person without having that person be able to share that attestation with others. But to do that in a way that, to be cryptographically verifiable, but without this person being able to share this proof with others, maybe require zero-knowledge proofs to make it, so that you can't forward the cryptographically verifiable attestation that you saw. I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
In sort of pivoting on that, with a lot of this data public, these sort of nascent identity systems like Jana was talking about are a good way to build online reputation. And sort of piggybacking off of Zaki's point earlier today that staking is DeFi, one of the big things in traditional finance is credit rating and the ability to like understand how much of a risk individual creditors are. So the ability to potentially build reputation and credit scoring systems on top of some of these identity systems is, I think, interesting. Is that something anyone's thought about or looked into or has thoughts about?
I think that, I think in the future we're going to see credit ratings be provided by agencies that are crawling all the blockchains and all verifiable information from all sources to provide scores or some summary of trustworthiness of some entity. Also verifiable claim because it's signed by that entity that's saying, we believe this to be true. And so I don't think there's going to be a single blockchain that provides like all the answers.
Yeah.
And is the solution, but maybe provides, maybe has at the majority of use cases, but it's going to have to tie in information from all the sources in different sovereign blockchains. So pretty excited to see what that might look like, but it's not very clear yet.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, at least currently what we see is that more and more people have started projects to get more and more public information that's public together in order to assess creditworthiness, and there's this very, in my view, a considerable issue because of privacy and also, it's kind of public what's going on, and previously it was not, and I think in this field, the European view is quite different to the US view. In the US you have this scoring and everything, and if you don't have a credit card then it's difficult to get anything else. In Europe that's actually more the opposite. And I think, and then we are back to what you just said, blockchain also includes the risk that everything is there and people can verify it later on. And people are currently not so aware of all the data they produce, and I think, we see it with the data protection discussion at the moment. As part of all the technological developments, we will see some discussion about what kind of data do we actually want to produce, do we actually want to have assembled, and we have this discussion about the right that things will be forgotten as well. And I think for blockchain developers that's quite a challenge, so I would be interested how you are addressing this.
I think it's a very important credit rating. It's a very interesting example because if I, for example, KYC, maybe only have some commitment on chain, and you use the Merkle or zero knowledge proofs if the cryptography exists to be able to prove that off-chain to some party, right? So I can then say, okay, look, this is proven here. I use this as my record. I never expose that KYC information on the blockchain, right? It's just who I am. It's some commitment. If I have a credit score, and that credit score needs to be fed into smart contracts that allow lending on a blockchain, for example, DeFi, that credit score for my identity must be public. It must be readable on the blockchain. It's world readable. And if it's hidden, it's no use. It has to be public. The point is, you don't have to expose my entire credit history. You'll have to expose my credit rating, right? Is that allowable? Is it acceptable? It's a question. I mean, you expose your eBay rating to the world. You expose your Airbnb, probably there's some sort of ranking there that's not everything in there, but you have some sort of rating on there. So you're already exposing certain ratings to the world anyway, but at what point do you want to stop that? Is it allowed to have a credit rating? I wouldn't feel so bad having a number on my name, personally, but other people might. But how much? If you have putting social scores on everyone, do your social score there. The first time someone sees you, they see your social rating, and if it's a low number, they want to talk to you because you're then a suspect, because you're not. So these numbers are not personally identifiable, but how much is that supposed to be our identity, our first face? Hello, this is my name, and here's my list of my credit score, here's my Airbnb rating, here's my social acceptability rating, here's my IQ, here's my GPA, here's my whatever else. Is that the first thing you see in someone before you even date them on Tinder?
Well, I think that tracking back to the right to be forgotten and thinking exactly about what you're just talking about, how do rules and regulations need to evolve in order to stay current with the state of technology? I think a lot of folks in blockchain look at systems like what's going on in China and Hong Kong right now, and they see decentralization of power as a way to help fight that. However, the right to be forgotten in GDPR was also a way to enshrine internet freedoms in the law, yet those two things seem to be in conflict. What do you think about that, Jana?
They're certainly in conflict, and I think that's one of the challenges for the next years. And as we see, it's political discussion, and we see what's happening in China. I mean, they're well advanced. They're in a position to enforce this, and we see the disadvantages resulting therefrom. And I think in our countries we should try to develop a different system. And I don't think that's so much about rules. I mean, at the end, you can set rules depending on what the parliament decides. I think it's more also for ourselves, for each of us to decide what do we actually want. I mean, each of us is posting things on Facebook, as you just mentioned. A lot of things are public. It's so easy to find out if you are really looking for things. And I think we have to think first about ourselves, what do we want, and then obviously we can always say, yeah, the state should not. But it's a different thing to say companies should not. And I mean, I personally think we should prevent such scoring, because otherwise, yeah, as you just mentioned, this will be the first questions once you meet. And, but yeah, Jay, what's your view on this?
So I have a lot of thoughts, but one is I have mixed feelings about GDPR. I kind of love it, I kind of hate it, but what's cool, I think, is that like in San Francisco, I believe recently, they started, they passed a policy to ban facial recognition technology deployed in mass, I believe. It might be San Francisco, it might be somewhere else. That's it. So unlike China, where it's being deployed, maybe cities and municipalities can choose to ban certain technology. And the nice thing about verifiable technology, about blockchains, the flip side of everything being so transparent is you can also figure out where the source of that is coming from, hopefully, right? So if it's that your storefront has a camera that's publishing information to the blockchain, and you can see that it's in San Francisco, then at least you can penalize that storefront, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one aspect of it. And here's an independent thought. I also don't like the idea of like assigning a number or like an objective criteria to an individual. And the fear is that with all this public information that can be compiled, right? But maybe on the flip side, it can actually get more interesting and nuanced. So imagine if instead of a universal credit score system, maybe what we will see evolve is a subjective credit system that uses all the information that's publicly available, but starting from your own preferences as to who you would trust, what circles you trust. You can calculate locally scores for the entire world. And maybe that makes it a little less daunting and scary because at least everything's still sort of subjective and different people will have different preferences about how they view things and what the starting point or the eigenvector is.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point because that's what you see with crowdfunding. I mean, people who don't get loans by banks, they start presenting their projects on these crowdfunding platforms and also just normal loans to go to some universities or whatsoever to implement some plans. And actually what's happening that some people who just simply like the idea or like this person for whatever reason, they support this. I mean, at least, I mean, it's not a huge scale at the moment, but yeah, that might at least for a part a potential way out.
Same thing for the Cosmos project. Like, we couldn't raise funding from VCs way back then because people didn't understand what proof of stake was about, but didn't realize that the world was tracking our project and there was a lot of interest in what we were doing. So as soon as we changed our plans to go public, that's when everything started happening.
I think one thing that's interesting is that a lot of the discussion here is kind of focused on like a very solid core individual identity, but the way that we actually exist online is much more of kind of this federated identity that's almost an archipelago, kind of like what you were talking about where you're tying your various identities together. Maybe the credit ranking systems we see moving forward are based on the history of individual crypto addresses, and like maybe I've got a great credit score on my business address, but my gaming credit score is like terrible. So I mean, maybe that's a future we're headed towards.
Yeah, and also the other part. This is from a book called "Identities to Move Money," recommended by someone. And one of the main concepts there is you can have pseudonymous identities.
Yeah.
So you can choose to create different identities with different profiles, and then maybe that'll help you learn like what kind of persona you want to focus on.
Yeah.
I like that idea of these subjective views based on kind of trust graphs. We all have a trust graph, and then we can extend that trust graph. You follow the recommendations on this graph, right? So if Donald Trump says you're an idiot, I don't care. It doesn't bother me, right? Someone else might believe that, but whatever. It actually improves your intelligence in my view. He says that. So that's, I think subjective views are actually very important, very interesting idea. And that is one thing that's actually naturally captured on blockchains, your transaction history.
Yeah.
So which accounts you interact with, which proposition you're voting on. Like if you're in governance voting on Cosmos, your votes are stored forever, right? So I think even if we start building trust graphs, aka Facebook, it's a bit dangerous, like analytics there, and you can apparently find a lot of information off people just by analyzing their networks. But that's requiring people to report their information. The other one's just observing what's existing, right? And you say, okay, if this person is trading with a bunch of addresses, these addresses are trustworthy, it's more likely to be trustworthy. These addresses are untrustworthy, then it's more likely to be an untrustworthy person. So at some point, maybe your subjective valuations, you can just say, okay, I value a few points, and then I use this network of interactions that exists on the blockchain to then, I rank a few things, and then I use that to rank people based on the associations with my few preferences. There's no values placed on the blockchain, it's just a network. And once you put a few values in the network, it can basically extrapolate from that various values to various people. Or various identities. Identities don't have to be people. I think pseudonyms is a very powerful point that we have 50 or 100 different identities which you can choose to use.
Yeah, and I think to the discussion earlier about like attaching scores to individual identities, I think people would be much more comfortable attaching scores to pseudonymous identities. I think that's like a lot of what we see on the internet now. So this has been kind of a discussion primarily focused on the financial use case. I think one of the other interesting use cases in identity is like kind of gaming or app-specific identities. Have you seen any exciting applications of that, or is anyone using IOV identities or talking about using IOV identities for gaming or application-specific use cases?
No, I haven't. I've had a few talks with people that are tweaking, but they're not talking about IoT as far as I know. The names, but the point of they have to be public, and provable. That is not a concern about having them public. It's a very different case. Your identity in the financial realm, people try to keep it more private, or your employment history is a more like guarded secret. But if someone is a great player on World of Warcraft, they're not trying to hide that. They're very happy to have it public and link that to their score in another game, and use that basically as a gateway to prove their ability to enter another sphere. Basically, okay, well, my great thing here, give me a free entrance in this other game because I want to prove it. Otherwise, it costs money, but I get free entrance because I'm a high-ranked player in this other game. So I think the difference there is no privacy really, and people must use them to publicly propagate. Like Instagram identity, no one's trying to hide them, they're trying to propagate that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's the data concerns which limit the use of identities are completely gone in the gaming sphere. It's much more fluid, it's anonymous, but I think it's basically meant to be a public-facing identity in the first place.
One application I'd love to see, and this is a subset of identity, is like real-world geographical identity. It doesn't have to be tied to your name, but at least to know that here's an individual who generally lives here. If there was just a way to incentivize the creation of that information, then I think everyone in the world can start participating in UBI experiments, basic income experiments, where you can have all these tokens in different sets of regions, and then permissionlessly experiment on creating a global income experiment, which might create a voluntary mix or balance between capitalism and more like socialism.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of, that is definitely one of the dreams of UBI. Yeah, I think at this point I would like to open it up for some audience questions, if that's all right with everyone. Does anyone have a question so far? Yes.
Sorry, could you guys speak about Sybil resistance? How would it work for identity?
For me, the main point is you can make 100 identities for free, but attaching claims to identity costs money or time. If I want to by KYC claim my identity, it costs some time, usually some money or time. And if I try to get 100 KYC claims on 100 different identities with the same ID card, the same provider will not sign 100 different times for me. They'll sign once for me, right? Not twice, maybe a few different ones. So there's a limit on who will attest to your identity. I can make many identities that are worthless. If I make one identity with my World of Warcraft score and my credit rating together, or make two identities and attach my World of Warcraft to one and my credit score to the other, I can split them. But I can't double and use that same World of Warcraft score on 5 different identities. So I think it's naturally Sybil resistant because we have some non-transferable claims that take time and energy to proof of work, basically. It's proof of work, or proof of identity, or proof of something outside the blockchain to make these claims, to attach them. So there's a natural Sybil resistance. It's not a zero cost to create identities. Empty identities are cheap, but identities with real claims, valuable claims, are hard to make.
Yeah, one is payment. Another is like algorithmic. You can look at things like PageRank, and what PageRank, Google's algorithm allowed you to do through like matrix eigenvector calculations, roughly, is make it so that even if you try to Sybil attack a system with many sets of links that connect to each other to fake a real vibrant site, it won't have a high score because it doesn't have the right attestations or links coming into that set of honeypot fake links. And I think you can do similar things with identity as well, at least in the context of getting a score. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, absolutely. A follow-on.
So maybe just a follow-up. If it's usually through PageRank and all that, the problem is bribery attacks. So I think I agree with you. I just think that it can be subverted very easily, especially if you're talking about developing regions. The only attesters there will usually by nature become corrupt over time. My actual question is a little bit of follow-up. Is it possible to have an identity system without tying it to some part of, but for an identity system related to people, is there a way for it to be untied to any biological fingerprint or DNA or something?
This is, I think, a very interesting question. Jana, do you have any thoughts on this topic? I have a couple.
I mean, from a legal point of view, we have discussed these different identities. I think really the question is what's the purpose of the identity. So if the identity shall actually replace a passport, then I think at the end, I mean, in the passport we have all these things already, so somehow it will, I assume it would be linked, just from a legal point of view, to make sure that's really the person. But we have discussed about all these other identities there. I think neither we need a state, nor something like what you just described. I mean, I think there should be other ways, but that's more a question to those who develop it, how they can verify.
I think just to sort of say this real quick, putting biometric data on a public chain is like one of the absolute worst things you can possibly do. So let's try to avoid that one. Sorry, Jay.
So can you help me understand the question? Is it how do you avoid getting biometric data onto the chain, or is it the question of how do you have a robust, like, real-world identity KYC system without any biometric data?
So maybe just a bit of context. So I used to run an uncollateralized fintech in Indonesia, and very quickly, even though we had attestations and all that, very quickly what we found on very far-flung regions, is that there's a very significant incentive for bribery attacks on the attesters, right? Or rather, they will attest people who are their friends and all that. So very quickly that came down. After many tries, the only reason, what we realized was what governments have realized for hundreds of years, right, is that identity must be tied to some biometric data of some kind, right? At the same time, putting my fingerprint on the blockchain is the worst idea ever. Right? You can talk about zero-knowledge proofs, you can talk about all of that. But I think that's a bit of context. The question really is there any other way, socially we found that, trust graphs and all that, still very vulnerable to Sybil attacks, very vulnerable to bribery attacks. Right? Are we going to just reinvent 100 years of government pivoting and legal knowledge and all that just to get down to the point where, at the end of the day, for a human identity, we're not talking about like gaming identities, those you can create pseudonymous.
Yeah.
But we're talking about UBI. Is there a way that we cannot rely on biometrics, zero-knowledge proof biometrics?
I think we don't rely on biometrics right now. You rely on the people checking the biometrics. If you go to, at least in Europe and America, most important papers must be signed in the presence of a notary. I don't put my biometric identity, my fingerprint, and my face scan on this contract. It is very important. I sign in the presence of a notary, and they co-sign that. These notaries are people trusted by the state to have verified off-chain my biometric data that I am me. This is attestations in the current, what I know of in Europe and American legal systems. Depending on the country, it's harder or easier to become a notary. You might have to be trained lawyers with lots of stuff. Now, in America, it's pretty simple, but they're also not as trusted. In Europe, mainly, it's if it's a notary stamp signed paper, it's very highly respected because it's very trustworthy. This really is a valid person, and no one's going to challenge the validity of this. That said, this is what evolved out of hundreds of years of development of legal systems here, and that is basically attestations, but not anyone can attest. You have certain key people that are attesting, and they have certain legal punishments if they false attest, which don't exist. I think the interesting point you made, which I had not considered, in Indonesia, for example, did far-flung regions. So in the cities or more developed areas, it seemed like it worked well, but in the villages, it was less developed legal political system and much more corruptible. So I don't know how to deal with that, because that seems like if we define a system, a high-tech system designed for highly developed societies that have a long history of certain rules and regulations and various things that ingrained, it's easier to build in a place when those rules have no meaning. Or the family connections are much more important than the legal rules written on paper. So they have different rules, not saying they have no rules, they have very different meanings. And so they're, I think norms, behavioral norms, are fairly different than behavioral norms you'd have in a large city, for example, which is highly regulated, usually much more legal, rule of law is much more important in a large city than in villages, much more social contracts locally. So I don't know if there's any way of solving that. Even government biometrics is questionable because someone has to check those biometrics.
Yeah, so having notaries is like this general solution of having like a layer of abstraction so that maybe underneath it's still biometrics, government ID, but at least the notary is acting as a proxy to that information, so you don't have to put all that information on the blockchain. Maybe another way besides biometrics though is I've been thinking about like how to solve a civil problem without necessarily using government data and stuff. It's the fact that you can't physically be in two places at once. So kind of like how we have polling for votes. Imagine if like, and this is a theoretical solution. Maybe it's kind of silly, but maybe it makes sense to implement someplace. Imagine everyone simultaneously has to be somewhere at a polling booth. And the polling booth operator is just like, they may get eventually audited later, but the idea is you might have like 1,000 people there, and 1,000 people each get identities, and you can tell that there were 1,000 people there, maybe because of a video camera, and you can tell that 1,000 identities were created, but using cryptographic techniques, you can make it so that you can't figure out which one's which. Imagine doing that all over the world. You can have civil resistant identities without biometric data.
Interesting. Mark?
By the ideals of the whole idea of democratic government, ideally we would be in a society where our personal lives were private and everything government did was enforced, public, and transparent. Instead, we're experiencing exactly the opposite. It's not only that we're experiencing the problem of loss of privacy, the additional problem, in some ways the bigger problem, is that we're experiencing an asymmetric loss of privacy. So at the same time that we're trying to engineer solutions to give us better privacy, we should see also what opportunities there are to create decentralized enforcement mechanisms that force governments to be less private and more transparent and less corrupt. WikiLeaks, I think, is a good example of such an intervention.
That's a great point. Thank you. I think we've hit time, so thank you all very much for participating, and great questions, guys. Thank you.